We will do all it takes to save our land. No more oppression.
We march for freedom. Our voices rise as one. No more oppression. The king's reign is done.
The kingdom of Nyero was quiet under the rule of King Kasasa, but there was an unsettling silence that had fallen over the land. Villagers whispered behind closed doors, for the king had become greedy. No longer was he the ruler they once revered. He had changed. The fields that once flourished were now barren. The rivers that once sparkled had run dry, and the people were starving. Yet King Kasasa feasted on a mountain of gold, his wealth growing as the people suffered. "How can we survive when he steals everything?" murmured Kato, a young man from the village of Bombo, his eyes filled with bitterness. The people of Nyero, though afraid, knew the time for silence had passed. Led by the wise elder Nambasa, a rebellion began to brew. Nambasa was an old man, his face etched with the wisdom of many years, his voice steady and commanding. His words stirred something deep within the hearts of the villagers. "We cannot wait any longer," Nambasa declared one evening as he gathered the villagers in a circle. "King Kasasa's greed has poisoned our land. It is time for a change." His eyes scanned the crowd. The villagers, once fearful, were now filled with a spark of hope. "You speak of rebellion," said Mirembe, a young woman, her voice trembling but full of determination. "But will the king listen to us?" "Listen? No," Nambasa replied, his eyes hardening. "But he will hear us. He will learn that a king who forgets the people will fall. We will make sure of it." The plan was set. The villagers, led by Nambasa, prepared to rise against the king. It would not be easy, but they knew they had no other choice. They had suffered too long. The first signs of the rebellion were subtle. In the small village of Bombo, people began to gather in secret. Kato, Mirembe, and the other young villagers trained with sticks, pretending to work in the fields while secretly sharpening their skills. Their eyes glinted with a shared determination. "We must be careful," Kato warned one evening, his voice low. "The king has spies everywhere." Mirembe nodded, her face set with resolve. "But the king is not invincible. He has made many enemies, and we are not alone. Others will rise with us." As the rebellion gained momentum, King Kasasa grew more paranoid. He ordered his soldiers to patrol the villages day and night, but the villagers moved swiftly and silently, blending into the shadows like ghosts. The king's once lavish palace was now surrounded by tension, and every day it felt like his throne wobbled just a little more. One night, under the cover of darkness, Nambasa gathered his people once again. "Tomorrow is the day," he said, his voice steady but heavy with the weight of their plan. "We will strike when the king least expects it." The morning came with a heavy stillness. The villagers marched toward the king's palace, their hearts pounding in unison. Nambasa led them, his cane tapping rhythmically against the earth, as if the very ground was aware of the rebellion. "Do you believe we can win?" Mirembe asked Kato as they walked side by side. "I don't know," Kato replied, "but if we don't try, we will have no future." The palace gates loomed ahead, guarded by the king's soldiers, but the villagers were determined. Nambasa, with his wisdom and cunning, had planned their attack carefully. The soldiers were too few, and the villagers too many. As they approached, the air was thick with anticipation. Suddenly, a shout broke the silence. "The king's soldiers!" one of the villagers cried. "They are coming!" The battle had begun. The clash was intense. The villagers fought with the fury of those who had nothing left to lose. Kato swung his stick, knocking a soldier to the ground, while Mirembe fought beside him, her eyes fierce and unyielding. Nambasa moved through the chaos like a shadow, guiding his people with precision. At the palace, King Kasasa watched from his balcony, his face twisted with fear and disbelief. He had never imagined that the people he had once ruled with an iron fist would dare to rise against him. "This is madness," he muttered to himself, his hands shaking. "I am their king. They cannot defeat me." But as he watched the battle unfold, he realized that he had underestimated the power of the people. The rebellion was not just about overthrowing him, it was about reclaiming their lives, their land, and their dignity.
The villagers gathered in the palace courtyard, breathing heavily but filled with triumph. Nambasa stood at the center, his eyes scanning the faces of the people. "We have won," he said, his voice strong. "But the work is far from over. We must rebuild together." As night fell, the villagers celebrated their victory, their laughter echoing through the palace. For the first time in many years, the people of Nyero felt free. But in the darkness, King Kasasa disappeared into the night, his heart filled with rage and bitterness. The rebellion had overthrown him, but the kingdom's future remained uncertain. The real work had just begun.
Was a place of quiet hope and rebuilding. The villagers began to return to their fields, planting crops that had been neglected for too long. The rivers slowly started to flow again, and the air seemed fresher. But despite the victory, the people of Nyero knew their journey was far from over. "The king is gone," Cato said one morning as he worked the land beside Mirembe. "But there are still many challenges ahead." Mirembe nodded, wiping the sweat from her brow. "Yes, the kingdom is broken, and the people need guidance. Who will lead us now?" Nambasa had become the natural leader of the rebellion, his wisdom and steady hand guiding the people through the turmoil. But even he knew that the road to recovery would be difficult. "We must rebuild from the ground up," Nambasa said as he addressed the villagers one evening. "This is not just about the end of one king, but the beginning of something new. We must ensure that no leader ever rises who will misuse their power again."
The people cheered, but in the back of Nambasa's mind, a troubling thought lingered. Even with Kasasa gone, there were still remnants of corruption within the kingdom. The people had won the battle, but the real test was whether they could create a fair and just society for all. As weeks passed, whispers began to spread throughout Nyero. Some villagers, tired of the long days of hard work, wondered if life under King Kasasa had been easier despite his cruelty. They longed for the comforts they had known, even if it had come at a high price. "Life was not easy under Kasasa," Nambasa said when he heard the rumors. But that was not life. It was slavery disguised as comfort. True freedom requires sacrifice. We must be patient. But patience was growing thin. The harvests were slow to return, and many families struggled to feed themselves. The villages that had once thrived now looked barren. The people of Nyero had won the battle, but the fight for survival was only just beginning.
In the village of Bombo, Kato and Mirembe discussed the challenges ahead. "People are starting to question Nambasa," Kato said, his voice heavy with concern. "They want results, but they don't understand that it takes time to rebuild from such devastation." Mirembe sighed. "I know. But if we don't have hope, if we don't have faith in this new way, then what was all of this for?" It was a question that haunted them both. The rebellion had been their chance for a better life, but now they faced the uncertain road ahead, unsure whether their victory would last or if it would fade, like the sun setting behind the hills. One evening, as the villagers gathered in the central square of Bombo, Nambasa spoke to them again. His face was weary, and the weight of leadership seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. "We are at a crossroads," Nambasa began. "The king's reign is over, but the corruption he left behind has not disappeared. There are those among us who seek to take advantage of this moment, who wish to seize power for themselves."
Cato and Mirembe listened intently. The rebellion had been hard enough, but now it seemed the true battle was against greed that lingered even after Kasasa's fall. We cannot let this new kingdom fall into the same trap, Nyambasa continued. We must ensure that every voice is heard and that power is shared equally. If we fail, the rebellion will have been for nothing. A murmur of agreement spread through the crowd. The people understood. They had fought for freedom, but now they had to fight for fairness and justice. Days turned into weeks, and the struggle for balance in the kingdom grew more complex. Nyambasa and the villagers worked tirelessly to restore peace, but there were signs of unrest. Some of the villages, especially those closest to the palace, had grown resentful. They felt as though they were being forgotten in the new order, as the people of Bombo were given more attention. We need to ensure that everyone is represented, Nyambasa said during one of his nightly meetings. If we neglect the other villages, we risk repeating the mistakes of the past. We must bring them into the fold and remind them that we are all one kingdom.
Kato, Mirembe, and others traveled to the neighboring villages to spread the message of unity. As they approached the village of Kiso, the air was thick with tension. The villagers there were wary of outsiders, having suffered under the king's rule for too long. "Why should we trust you?" a man named Juma demanded as Kato stepped forward. "Your people have taken the lead, but we have struggled just as much. What has changed?" Kato looked him in the eye, his voice firm but respectful. "The king is gone, and we are all free. It is not about Bombo or Kiso. It is about Nyero as a whole. We must work together, not as separate villages, but as one people." Juma stood silent for a moment, his brow furrowed. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Perhaps you are right, but we will watch. We will see if this is truly for everyone or if it is just another power grab." The coming months were filled with careful negotiation and compromise. The villages began to unite under a new council led by Nyambasa, with representatives from every village, including Bombo and Kiso. The people slowly began to trust one another again, and the kingdom began to heal. However, not everyone was happy with the new order. Deep in the shadows, there were those who still desired power. A group of former loyalists to King Kasasa, led by a man named Wamba, began to stir unrest once more. They had seen how the rebellion had weakened the monarchy, and now they sought to regain control. "We cannot let this happen again," Nyambasa warned one evening as he addressed the council. "Wamba and his followers will stop at nothing to return to the old ways. We must act before it's too late." The tension in Nyero was growing once again, but the people were no longer the same. They had tasted freedom, and they would not let it slip away easily. The fight was far from over, but this time they stood together stronger than before. The kingdom must decide whether it will remain united in the face of betrayal, or whether it will fall back into the hands of those who seek to exploit it for personal gain. The dawn was quiet, but beneath the calm, tensions were brewing. Nambasa's warnings had proven to be true. Mwamba and his followers were working in the shadows, spreading rumors and trying to weaken the council's authority. As the days went by, whispers of rebellion began to rise once again. At a meeting in Bombo, Nyambasa sat with his closest allies, his face etched with concern. "Mwamba's influence is growing," he said, his voice heavy. "He's gathering those who still believe in the old ways, those who think power should lie in the hands of a few." Kato frowned. "But what can we do? The people trusted us. We fought for their freedom." Mirambe's voice was calm but firm. "The people are restless. They want change, but they don't understand that change takes time."
As quick fixes. We have to show them that real change comes from patience and unity, not from violence and empty promises. "But the longer we wait," Kato said, "the more Mwamba will gain strength. He's already started recruiting people from the outlying villages." Mirambe looked out the window, her eyes narrowing. "We need to act before it's too late." That night, as the moonlight bathed the village of Bombo in a silvery glow, a shadow moved through the streets. Mwamba had arrived. The former loyalists, who had once served Kasasa, were not hiding in the darkness. They moved openly now with pride and defiance as they walked toward the center of the village. The people gathered, drawn by the promise of change. Mwamba stood on the raised platform, his voice rising above the crowd.
For too long, we have been ruled by those who do not understand our needs. Nambasa and his council have failed you. They promise hope, but deliver nothing. It is time to return to the power of the king. The crowd murmured, and some faces seemed unsure. But others, tired of waiting and eager for action, began to cheer. Nambasa, Kato, and Mirembe were not far away. They had heard Mwamba's speech, and they knew what was at stake. "We cannot let this go unchallenged," Nambasa said, determination in his voice. "We've worked too hard to let it all fall apart." Kato clenched his fists. "But we need the people to see that Mwamba is a threat. He speaks to their fear, but he offers no real solutions." Mirembe took a deep breath. "We'll show them the truth. We'll gather the villages and confront him directly." The following morning, Nambasa called for an urgent gathering of the people of Bambo and surrounding villages. He stood before them, his eyes scanning the crowd, which had grown larger in the past few days.
"Listen carefully," Nambasa said, his voice strong but filled with sorrow. "Mwamba promises you power, but it is a lie. He wants to take us back to the days when only a few had control. He wants to return us to the rule of greed and oppression." The villagers shifted uneasily. Nambasa's words were powerful, but Mwamba's promises had also touched something deep in their hearts, the longing for an easy life, the hope that someone would fix everything. Nambasa continued, "I understand your pain. We are all struggling, but real change takes time. We cannot go back to the days of Kasasa. If we do, we will destroy everything we've fought for." A voice from the crowd shouted, "But what have you given us, Nambasa? Our fields are still empty. Our homes are still poor." Mirembe stepped forward, her voice calm yet commanding. "We've only just begun to rebuild. It takes time to fix the damage of a lifetime. We must stand together or we risk losing everything." There was a long pause, and the crowd's murmurs died down. Slowly, the people began to understand. Nambasa wasn't asking for blind loyalty. He was asking for patience, unity, and trust in their collective strength.
Over the next few days, tensions reached a boiling point. Mwamba's rebellion was growing stronger, and his followers were becoming bolder. They began raiding villages, spreading fear, and forcing people to choose sides. In the village of Kioso, a group of Mwamba's men arrived one evening, demanding that the villagers join their cause. "Join us or suffer the consequences," one of Mwamba's men shouted, his voice full of anger. "The council is weak. They've sold you out. Power belongs to those who take it." Kato and Mirembe, along with a small group of trusted villagers, arrived just in time to stop the raid. Kato stepped forward, his voice steady. "We will not be bullied by threats. You may think you have power, but true strength lies in the hearts of the people. We stand with Nambasa, and we will not be moved." The tension between the two groups was palpable. For a moment, it seemed like war would break out right there in the middle of the village square. But then Nambasa appeared, walking slowly toward the gathering. His presence silenced both sides. "Mwamba," Nambasa said quietly, his eyes locking with the rebel leader. "You speak of power, but you have no understanding of it. Power is not something that can be taken by force. It is something that is earned through trust, wisdom, and unity." Mwamba sneered. "You are weak, Nambasa. You don't have the strength to lead these people. They will follow me, just as they followed your false promises." But the people of Kiso had already made their decision. Slowly they stepped forward, standing beside Nambasa and his council. "We stand with Nambasa," one villager called out. And one by one the others joined in, until Mwamba's men were forced to retreat. The battle for Nyero was far from over. The people had shown their strength, but Mwamba's rebellion was not easily quelled.
As the days passed, the fight between the old and new ways continued to rage, with Nambasa and his allies leading the charge for a fair and just society. But with every victory came a new challenge. The question that lingered in everyone's minds was whether they could rebuild their kingdom without falling into the same trap of greed and corruption that had doomed their past.
His leadership is tested time and again as the people of Nyero strive to build a kingdom founded on fairness, unity, and trust. But Mwamba's rebellion is far from finished, and the path to peace is anything but certain. The night was still, the only sound being the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. But in the village of Nyero, tension hung thick in the air. After the recent victory in Kiso, Nambasa and his council knew that Mwamba would not back down. The rebellion was spreading, fueled by those who saw the new council as weak and ineffectual. In Nambasa's hut, the council met in silence. The flickering fire cast shadows on their faces, but there was no warmth in the room. "We can't keep doing this," Kato said, frustration in his voice. "Mwamba is everywhere. He's convincing people that we're the enemy." Mirembe leaned forward, her brow furrowed. "We can't just fight him in the villages. He has allies. He has power. We need to weaken his influence, not just his strength."
Nambasa, who had been quiet until now, spoke slowly. "I agree. This is no longer just about stopping raids or confronting rebels. It's about reaching the people. We need to show them what true leadership looks like." "And how do we do that?" Kato asked. "The people have seen Mwamba speak with such conviction. He promises them a better life. We've shown them the truth, but they're still desperate for change." Nambasa's voice was firm. "We show them that we care. We show them that we are working every day to build something better. We rebuild the villages, strengthen our communities. Let them see the difference." "But how?" Mirembe asked, her voice low. "There's only so much we can do when every day brings new attacks." "By leading with compassion," Nambasa said. "By offering them hope, not with empty promises, but with action." The next morning, Nambasa, Kato, and Mirembe traveled to a small village on the outskirts of Nyero, one of the most affected by Mwamba's rebel forces. The fields there were barren, the homes crumbling. The villagers had little hope left. As Nambasa entered the village, the faces of the people turned toward him, some with suspicion, others with hopelessness. He had heard the whispers. Many of them were considering joining Mwamba's side, believing that change would never come under the council's rule.
Nambasa stood before them, his gaze steady. "We know what you've been through," he said, his voice carrying across the crowd. "But we will not give up on you. You are not alone." A murmur spread through the crowd, but it wasn't a cheer. It was a mixture of doubt and cautious optimism. "I know that we have not given you the life you deserve, but that is about to change," Nambasa continued. "We are not here to make promises. We are here to take action." He pointed to the cracked, dry fields. "We will work with you to restore these fields. Together, we will rebuild your homes, your lives. We will make Nyero a kingdom where no one is left behind." Mirembe stepped forward, her eyes kind and understanding. "We know the road will be hard," she said, "but we are here to walk with you every step of the way." For a moment, the villagers were silent. Then, slowly, one by one, they began to nod. One older woman stepped forward, her voice trembling. "We have nothing left to lose. If you can give us hope, we will follow you." The weeks that followed were filled with hard work and dedication. Nambasa and his council moved from village to village, not just offering promises, but leading efforts to repair homes, plant crops, and rebuild the infrastructure that had been damaged by years of neglect. The people began to see the fruits of their labor, and the atmosphere in the villages slowly began to change. But in the shadows, Mwamba was still organizing. He wasn't ready to let go of his dream of taking power, and the longer Nambasa's council worked, the more determined he became. He was gathering his forces for one final assault,
a battle for the heart of Nyero. One evening, as the sun began to set, Cato looked out over the village they had been working in. "Do you think we're doing enough?" he asked Nambasa, his voice filled with doubt. "We're doing everything we can, but we know that Mwamba will never stop. His hunger for power won't allow him to." "Then we prepare for the fight of our lives," Cato said, determination in his eyes. "We don't give up, not now." The day arrived sooner than expected. A messenger came rushing into the village with terrible news. Mwamba and his followers were advancing on Nyero, and they had gathered a large force. This was no longer a series of raids. It was a full-blown rebellion, and it was heading straight for the heart of the kingdom. Nambasa called an emergency council meeting. He said, "This is it. We cannot back down now. We must stand and defend what we have fought for."
"We cannot fight a war of attrition," Mirembe said. "We must strike at the heart of Mwamba's forces. If we defeat him here, we can break his rebellion for good." "But we don't know how many of his followers are with him," Cato warned. "We can't underestimate his power." "We don't have a choice," Nambasa replied. "We fight for the future of Nyero." The battle was set to take place in the heart of Nyero, the village square where Nambasa had once addressed the people. It was here, in the shadow of the past, that the fate of the kingdom would be decided. The two sides clashed with fierce determination, the sound of metal against metal echoing through the village. Mwamba's followers were numerous, but Nambasa's people fought with the unity they had found in their hard work and perseverance. The fight was long and grueling. Nambasa's forces were outnumbered, but they were fueled by a deep sense of purpose. Each blow they struck was for the future of their kingdom, for the hope that they had worked so hard to restore. And in the midst of the battle, it was Nambasa who faced Mwamba, their eyes locking in a final, decisive moment. "You have lost, Nambasa," Mwamba sneered, his sword raised. "No," Nambasa replied, his voice steady. "You've already lost the moment you decided to tear this kingdom apart."
In a flash of movement, Nambasa disarmed Mwamba, his blade striking down with precision. Mwamba fell to his knees, defeated. The battle was over and Nyero was saved, but the victory came at a cost. Many lives had been lost, and the scars of the rebellion would take time to heal. Yet the kingdom stood, and the people knew that their journey had only just begun. As Nambasa stood before the people, he could see the weariness in their eyes. But there was also something else: hope. They had fought for their future, and they had won. "This is not the end," Nambasa said, his voice carrying over the crowd. "It is only the beginning. Together, we will rebuild. Together, we will ensure that the mistakes of the past are never repeated." The people cheered, not for victory, but for the promise of a new day. Nambasa's leadership would be tested in new ways, but he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The kingdom, though scarred, had emerged stronger, united in purpose and determined to create a future free from the corruption of the past.
The days following the rebellion were filled with both celebration and mourning. While the village of Nyero celebrated their hard-won freedom, they also grieved the loss of so many lives, families, friends, neighbors. The pain of loss was heavy in the air, but it was clear to everyone that they had fought for something greater than themselves. They had fought for the future of their children, for their homes, and for the legacy of a kingdom that would not be defined by corruption. Nambasa stood in the village square, his heart heavy with the weight of the responsibility he now carried. It wasn't just about the battle they had won, it was about rebuilding their lives and ensuring that no ruler would ever again abuse their power as Mwamba had done. The people had already started to rebuild their homes, their fields, and their hope. The work was slow but steady, and Nambasa moved through the village, offering encouragement, lending a hand where he could, and speaking with the elders who had been part of the resistance. Mirembe worked tirelessly with the women of the village, organizing efforts to plant new crops, while Kato and the young men helped restore the roads and strengthen the defenses of the village. But Nambasa's mind was not at rest. He knew that their victory over Mwamba, while significant, was only the first step. The kingdom was fragile. The scars of the rebellion would take time to heal, and there were still forces in the kingdom,
those who had supported Mwamba, who might try to rise again. One afternoon, as Nambasa walked through the village, he was stopped by an elderly woman, her face lined with years of wisdom and hardship. "Leader Nambasa," she said, her voice trembling, "there is something you need to know." Nambasa turned to her, his expression curious. "What is it, Mama Kisa?" She glanced around, ensuring no one was watching. Mwamba's influence did not die with him. There are whispers in the villages further to the north. Some still follow his ways, believing his promises of power. His supporters are hiding, waiting for the right moment to strike again. Nambasa's heart sank. "How many are we talking about?" "Not many," she replied, her eyes dark with concern. "But they are dangerous. They are the remnants of his army, men who know nothing but violence." The realization hit Nambasa like a stone. Mwamba's rebellion had not truly been extinguished. His legacy was far from over. "We cannot wait for them to come to us," Nambasa said, determination rising in his chest. "We must take the fight to them before they can harm anyone else." The decision to leave Nyero and head north to confront the remnants of Mwamba's rebellion was not an easy one. Nambasa called a meeting of his closest allies, Kato, Murumbe, and a few of the trusted elders.
"We cannot live in fear," Nambasa said, his voice calm but firm. "If we allow Mwamba's followers to grow in strength again, we risk everything we've worked for. We must strike now, while they are still disorganized." Mirembe shook her head, concern in her eyes. "But Nambasa, what if we are wrong? What if there are still too many of them? What if they are more prepared than we think?" "We won't know unless we face them," Nambasa replied. "We've already proven that we are stronger than they realize. We cannot afford to wait and let them come to us when they're ready." Kato, who had been listening intently, spoke up. "We'll need more than just a handful of fighters. We must gather our allies, all those who have pledged loyalty to the council. This must be a united effort." Nambasa nodded. "Agreed. We will send word to the other villages. We need every hand, every spear, every voice that stands for a new future. If we are to protect this kingdom, we must act as one." The following weeks were spent gathering allies from across the kingdom. Word spread quickly about the remaining rebels hiding in the northern villages, and soon more and more villagers began to answer Nambasa's call. Farmers, hunters, elders, and young men, all of them stood with the council, ready to defend their homes.
Nambasa and his council began to train the villagers in battle strategy, reinforcing their skills in the art of war. While they worked tirelessly to prepare, there was an undeniable sense of unity, a bond forged through the hardships they had endured together. On the eve of the battle, Nambasa stood at the edge of the camp, overlooking the vast expanse of the land before them. The wind blew cold, carrying with it the scent of the earth and the promise of an uncertain future. Kato walked up beside him, his expression grim. "Do you think we're doing the right thing?" he asked. Nambasa looked at him, his gaze unwavering. "We have no choice. To keep the peace, we must eliminate the threat before it grows. We must show them that the kingdom of Nyero will not bow to fear, corruption, or violence again." "And if we fail?" Kato asked, the fear in his eyes impossible to hide. Nambasa placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. "Then we will die knowing we fought for the right cause. But I believe we will win. Together, we are stronger than they could ever be." As dawn broke the next day, the army set out toward the northern villages. The landscape changed as they traveled, the flat plains giving way to dense forests and rugged hills. It was a harsh and unforgiving land, a fitting place for a final battle.
The journey was long, and the morale of Nambasa's army began to waver as hunger and exhaustion set in. But Nambasa's leadership was a beacon in the darkness, and the villagers pushed forward, determined to end this conflict once and for all. Finally, they reached the northern villages, only to find them eerily quiet. The trees whispered in the wind, but there was no sign of life.
The remnants of Muamba's forces had hidden themselves well. "We know they're here," Kato whispered, his hand on his sword. "We just need to find them." Mirembe nodded. "They're waiting for us to make a move. We must remain cautious." The group split into smaller squads, carefully scouring the village for any signs of the enemy. It was as if the village itself was holding its breath. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the trees, followed by the sounds of shouting. The enemy had been waiting for them, and now they were closing in. The battle was fierce. Muamba's loyalists fought with the same desperation that had fueled their rebellion. But Nambasa's army was united, driven by the promise of a better future for their kingdom.
Nambasa and his council fought at the front, their swords flashing in the sunlight as they cut through the enemy ranks. The village square, once a place of peace, was now a battlefield, the ground soaked with blood. Mirembe, her eyes blazing with determination, rallied the women who had joined the fight. They were fierce, and their courage inspired even the most reluctant fighters to stand tall. As the day wore on, it became clear that Muamba's forces were losing. One by one, they fell back, retreating into the forest, leaving the battlefield littered with the remnants of their rebellion. Nambasa stood amidst the carnage, his breath heavy, his face streaked with dirt and sweat. The battle was won, but the cost was high. As he looked around at his people, his friends and allies, he knew that the struggle for peace was far from over. The final remnants of Muamba's rebellion were eliminated, but the kingdom was far from whole. Nambasa knew that while they had secured the victory, the real work was just beginning. Rebuilding their trust in one another, restoring the peace, and ensuring that history would never repeat itself would be the true test of his leadership. "We have won the battle," Nambasa said to the villagers gathered around him. "But it is the peace that we will fight for every day. We are not just rebuilding a kingdom, we are rebuilding the hearts of our people."
The people cheered, their voices rising in unity, a chorus of hope that echoed across the land. The kingdom of Nyero had been forged in the fires of rebellion, but it would now rise anew, stronger, wiser, and united. And under Nambasa's leadership, it would never again fall into the hands of corruption. As the months passed, the village of Nyero transformed. What had once been a place of sorrow, ruled by fear and corruption, was now a symbol of hope and resilience. The fields were fertile once again, and the homes, which had been battered by the forces of war, now stood strong. The people worked side by side, no longer divided by the fear of tyranny, but united in their common goal of rebuilding their lives. Nambasa and his council worked tirelessly to re-establish the kingdom's leadership, ensuring that power would never again fall into the wrong hands. The elders played a central role, offering wisdom and guidance, while Mirembe took charge of organizing the Women's Council, ensuring that all voices were heard and no one was left behind. Kato, ever the strategist, worked on training the young men and women in defense, preparing them for any future threats.
Despite the peace that had settled over Nyero, there was always a sense of vigilance in the air. They knew that peace was fragile, and they had learned the hard way that it must be protected. Nambasa made sure that there would be no room for corruption to take root again. A new council, made up of people from all walks of life, was established, each person having an equal say in the decisions that would shape the future of the kingdom. One evening, Nambasa stood at the edge of the village, looking out over the rolling hills that surrounded Nyero. The sky was painted with the soft colors of sunset, a reminder of the peace they had fought for. But in his heart, he knew that the road ahead would not always be easy. There would be challenges, setbacks, and obstacles, but he was no longer the uncertain leader he had once been. He had seen firsthand the strength of the people, the power of unity, and the resilience that could emerge from the darkest times. One day, as Nambasa walked through the village, he was approached by Mama Kisa, the elderly woman who had first warned him about the remnants of Muamba's rebellion. Her face was lined with years of wisdom, but there was a gentleness in her eyes that spoke of peace and healing.
"Leader Nambasa," she said softly, "you have done something great here. You have brought us back from the brink of destruction. But remember,
The true test of a leader is not in the battles you win, but in the way you treat the people you lead. Nambasa smiled, touched by her words. I could not have done it alone, Mama Kisa. This village, this kingdom belongs to all of us. We are all leaders now, together. She nodded, her eyes glistening with pride. Yes, together. And may we always remember that the greatest power is the power of kindness, of understanding, and of unity. As Nambasa turned to leave, he was joined by Mirembe, who had been silently watching the exchange. Her eyes met his with a knowing look. You've learned much, haven't you? She asked, her voice warm and gentle. Nambasa nodded. I have. The greatest lessons are often the hardest won. They walked together toward the village, their footsteps light as the sun dipped below the horizon. The future of Nyero was no longer uncertain. It was a future built on trust, compassion, and the promise that power would never again be used to divide them. The people of Nyero had faced the darkness, and together they had emerged into the light.
And so, with the wisdom of the past, the strength of the present, and the hope for the future, Nambasa and the people of Nyero began to rebuild, not just their homes, but their hearts. Their kingdom would forever stand as a testament to the power of unity and the courage of a people who would never again bow to corruption.
And that, my friends, is how the people of Nyero rose from the ashes of corruption to build a kingdom of unity and truth. If this story touched your heart, don't just leave quietly. Tap that subscribe button and join me for more tales of wisdom, courage, and the lessons our ancestors left behind.